You can see it from the city. That's what makes it feel different. Not hidden in the desert, not buried in the middle of nowhere, just sitting there, in the middle of the water. Close enough to see, too far to reach. Millions of people come here every year. They walk the cell blocks, take pictures, stand inside tiny concrete rooms, and leave saying the same thing. I can't imagine being trapped here. But for the men sent to Alcatraz, that wasn't imagination, that was reality. This island became home to gangsters, bank robbers, escape artists, people considered too dangerous or too difficult for ordinary prisons. But what made Alcatraz famous wasn't torture. It wasn't execution. It wasn't violence. It was something quieter. It was isolation. Because sometimes punishment isn't what happens to you, it's what doesn't happen. No privacy, no escape, no forgetting where you are. Welcome to Alcatraz Island. This is the real history behind America's most infamous prison. Long before Alcatraz became a prison, it was considered valuable because of where it sat. The rocky island sits in the middle of San Francisco Bay. In the 1850s, after the California Gold Rush, San Francisco exploded. People poured into California. Money flowed, trade expanded, officials worried. How do you protect one of the fastest growing places in America? So the island became military. Fortifications appeared, cannons, barracks, storage, and eventually prisoners. By the late 1800s, Alcatraz became a military prison. The island started earning its reputation. Prisoners complained about cold, wind, fog, silence, and something unexpected: seeing normal life. San Francisco looked close enough to swim to, but the currents were brutal. Water temperatures stayed dangerously cold. Escape didn't feel impossible, it felt cruel. By the 1930s, America had a problem: organized crime. Bank robbers, public fear, names became celebrities, gangsters gained status. Prisons weren't controlling certain inmates. Officials wanted one place that would. The answer? Alcatraz. In 1935, the island reopened as a federal penitentiary. This wasn't where prisoners started. This was where prisoners ended up. If you repeatedly caused problems, if you were violent, if you tried to escape, you could be transferred here. Alcatraz became known as the prison system's prison. Maximum security, maximum control, maximum isolation. Movies make Alcatraz look chaotic. Former accounts often describe something different. Routine, wake up, count, breakfast, work, count, lunch, work, count, dinner, lockdown, every day, over and over. Cells measured roughly 5 feet wide, 9 feet deep. Inside was a metal bed, small sink, a toilet, and a tiny shelf. Nothing luxurious, no decorations, no escape. Former prisoners talked about how sound changed here. Doors, footsteps, keys, and the fog horns from the bay. But the strangest part was the city noise. Imagine hearing people living normal lives while you sat in a concrete box. Some inmates later said that part stayed with them more than the bars. This is where Alcatraz's reputation really came from. The prison didn't become infamous because guards beat people. Strict rules and control were the defining features, and the punishment everyone remembers was D-Block. Some prisoners were placed here after fights or serious rule violations, and one cell became legendary, 14D. Tiny, dark, minimal outside stimulation. Former inmates described losing track of time. Meals passed through slots, very little interaction, no distraction, no normal routine. Accounts vary, but multiple former prisoners later described the experience as deeply difficult. Even prisoners who handled normal prison life reportedly feared solitary. There's a quote often repeated: "You didn't fear Alcatraz, you feared ending up alone." The most famous prisoner here was Al Capone. Before prison, he was powerful, feared, public. Inside Alcatraz, none of that mattered. Stories describe him adapting poorly. Later in life, his health declined. One story that became famous: guards reportedly allowed him access to music. He played banjo. Imagine that. One of America's most feared gangsters playing banjo on an island prison. George Machine Gun Kelly, known publicly as terrifying, but former reports often described him differently inside. Quiet, cooperative, less dramatic than his reputation suggested. Robert Stroud, one of the most misunderstood. People think Alcatraz is where he raised birds. It wasn't. That happened earlier. But the nickname followed him. He became one of the prison's most famous residents. His story later became a movie. Mickey Cohen, another inmate who later described Alcatraz as psychologically exhausting. Not because of violence, because every day felt identical, and eventually, that was the punishment. When people talk about Alcatraz, they talk about escape, because the prison wasn't designed to stop you from leaving. It was designed to make escape feel hopeless. Look around. Cold water, powerful currents, open bay, distance that looks manageable until you're in it. Officially, 36 men attempted escape in 14 separate incidents. Most were captured, some were killed, several disappeared. And those disappearances are part of why people still argue about Alcatraz today, because not every ending was clear. One of the earliest famous attempts happened in 1937. Two prisoners, Theodore Cole and Ralph Rowe, they worked in the prison industries building, and one day, during heavy fog, they slipped through a window and disappeared. Search crews looked, but nothing. No bodies, no confirmed sightings. Officials believed they drowned, but nobody actually knows. The uncertainty became part of Alcatraz's mythology, because once someone disappears in water, you stop getting answers. Then came 1962, and this is a story everyone remembers. 3 men, with months of preparation, a plan so strange it sounded impossible. The men, Frank Morris, brothers John Anglin and Clarence Anglin. There was originally a 4th participant, Alan West, but he never made it out of his cell in time. The group noticed deterioration behind vents. Using improvised tools, including modified spoons and homemade devices, they slowly enlarged openings, night after night, quietly, patiently, behind their cells. Then, they created something unforgettable. Fake heads, painted, hair attached, placed in the bed so guards wouldn't notice. For months, nobody realized what was happening. They also collected raincoats, dozens of them, and turned them into flotation equipment. Then came escape night, June 11th, 1962. They crawled behind cells, moved upward, reached the roof, climbed down, inflated the raft, and disappeared. Morning came, guards started counts, then noticed the heads weren't moving. Searches exploded. The FBI investigated, and years passed. The official position was they were presumed drowned, but there's never been confirmed proof. No bodies and no certainty, and that mystery became bigger than the prison itself. If escape created the legend, 1946 created the fear. This wasn't a quiet escape. This became war. Several inmates overpowered guards. They gained access to weapons, captured hostages, and attempted to break out. But there was a problem. They couldn't access one critical key, and suddenly they were trapped. Inside the prison, with weapons and nowhere to go. For 2 days, gunfire echoed, guards hid, hostages were trapped, military assistance was brought in, and eventually, forces regained control. By the end, guards had died, prisoners had died, others were severely injured. This became known as the Battle of Alcatraz. And for many, the event became the moment Alcatraz stopped feeling like a prison and started feeling like a fortress. So why did Alcatraz close? People expect the answer to be a scandal, but mostly it was because of money. Everything came by boat. The food, the fuel, water, supplies, maintenance. Operating Alcatraz became expensive. In 1963, the prison closed after less than 30 years. But that wasn't the end of the island. Now, the part everyone asks about. Ghost stories. Even people who don't believe in hauntings often describe Alcatraz differently. Cold spots, footsteps, voices, cell doors. One location comes up repeatedly. D block, especially cell 14D. Stories describe strange sounds, heavy feelings, visitors leaving early, employees hearing things after hours. One popular story claims a former inmate once reported an unseen presence in solitary. Whether that happened exactly as later retellings describe, story survived, and maybe that says something. Even Al Capone later reportedly described feeling uneasy while imprisoned. Some guys describe hearing music near areas where Capone once played banjo. Again, story or reality depends on who you ask. But Alcatraz doesn't need ghosts. The atmosphere does enough. And standing at Alcatraz, you realize the scariest part isn't the bars, the cells, or even the escape stories. It's the fact that this place was real. Real people, real punishment, real isolation. Today, it's one of America's most famous tourist stops, but for decades, this island was where people disappeared from normal life. If you love dark history, abandoned places, haunted stories, and destinations with a past that they can't escape, hit subscribe and join us for the next stop in our Dark Destination series.